Hi, this is The Interior Collective, a podcast for the business of beautiful living, presented by IDECO Studio, and I'm Anastasia Casey. The thing design school will never teach you is what to charge. Today's episode of The Interior Collective is all about pricing as an interior designer, from different ways to charge, the pros and cons of each, and the formula we've found most successful. We are not holding anything back. We talk a lot about pricing at Design Camp, which makes me particularly excited to welcome today's guest, Lindsey Borchard of Lindsey Brooke Design, my Design Camp co-founder and forever business best friend. Lindsey is our oldest, dearest client at IDECO Studio, and we've walked hand in hand growing our businesses together over the last few years. One thing I've always admired most about Lindsey is her commitment to transparency in the industry. Lindsey truly leads her life, both personally and professionally, from a place of honesty and integrity, constantly uplifting other designers and female business owners. Lindsey Borchard's work is ultimately inspired by her own life. She's a mom of 2 boys, and she deeply understands the impact that a well-designed home can have on your family. A born and bred Southern California girl, her work carries that same organic, natural beauty and distinctly relaxed feel of the California landscape. Put simply, a Lindsey Borchard space is an invitation to live a more beautiful life every day. Welcome, Lindsey. Thank you so much for squeezing us in. I know you have the busiest 2 weeks of your life right now as we prepare for Design Camp. After we have recorded this and it actually goes live, we'll have already had Design Camp behind us and we'll be planning for our September event. Lindsey, thank you for joining.
Of course. I mean, you ask and I am there.
I was like, how do we make Lindsey a permanent fixture on the show? I'm like, I think Lindsey's going to get a slot every season.
I'm down.
Thank you for being so candid and open at camp. I'm really excited to be able to bring that conversation and that transparency through to the podcast to our listeners. Pricing is a frustrating topic for a lot of people. Pricing is really hard. You can't Google it. If you don't have a great crew of design best friends, it can be hard to just ask someone what they charge. So we're really going to break it down. I know you have worked through a lot of trial and error. Us at IDECO, we have a lot of information that we're really privileged to have from working with so many designers. So we kind of have like this collective knowledge of what seems to work for people and what doesn't. Certainly there's no one size fits all, but let's break it down to the very beginning. A huge part of knowing your worth and how much to bill is based to your overhead expenses, how much it actually costs to run your business. What are some of the most forgotten overhead costs you think people are skipping?
Yeah, I mean, I think that when you look at pricing as a whole, you have to start with your overhead because you can talk to as many people as you want to talk to, but unless you don't have a good idea of what it costs you to run your business, you can't really figure out how you're going to charge your clients. So there's a lot of overhead. I mean, we have a lot of overhead and things like insurance people might forget about things like especially like the losses. There's always losses that we take on projects, right? It could be that a light fixture was damaged and we didn't claim it in time, and so now we're stuck with that light fixture. We always try to get those costs covered, but there's just always losses, and I know that that's hard to account for, but you have to have kind of like an average number or a number that you can put up and go, okay, every month we're going to account for this many losses with whatever project. I think that marketing needs, people think that, for instance, like we use you for marketing, that's a flat fee. And so we go, okay, great, that's our flat fee. But then we, still have to pay for photographers, and we still maybe will use a videographer. Maybe we're, buying ads or something like, maybe someone is. But I think that those are the things that get overlooked, especially photographers, photography, when you maybe don't know how many projects you're going to shoot in a year. So we always, in the beginning of the year, look at our kind of roster of projects and go, okay, we know this many projects for sure are finishing. Maybe we'll add on 1 or 2, and then we'll kind of figure out how much that overall, like we've worked with Amy now so much, I know how many photos I'll usually be taking and whatnot. So I can plan a little bit better. But marketing needs for sure. Childcare is a big one. I know that some people will be like, oh, well, that's a personal cost, but it is a business cost. I can't do my business unless my children are taken care of. So, and then just the little things like food. If we, if you have a team, like we provide lunch to our team, once a week, and if we're on installs, and so that has to get kind of counted for in our overhead, gas, mileage, things like that. So it's very easy to go, okay, I have rent, I have my utilities, I have like payroll, but it's all the little things that I think you really have to sit down and like list out.
Yeah, definitely. And those things add up and they add up fast.
Yes, add up quickly.
How often do you think you should evaluate your overhead costs, and is annually enough to do that?
No. I mean, it's great if you are doing it annually over nothing. We do it quarterly with our CPA. So we will go over our P&Ls every quarter, and then I go over it monthly. So I use Studio Designer for our invoicing, for our clients, for our products, everything. So their report system is amazing. So I can run reports and compare where we're at and make sure that we're being profitable. And I think it helps having those quarterly meetings with my CPA. So I kind of know, like, at that point, we're looking at, okay, where do we want to be? And she's helping me go, okay, if you want to, invest money in, let's say, expanding our retail or expanding the collection or whatever, you have to make X, Y, and Z on this. And then you can do that. Or, so I like to look at it monthly. Sometimes it's more often, sometimes it's weekly, but I really try to be in that. And I think that's really important. I think money scares a lot of people. And it's not it's not an easy subject to talk about, to figure out. But the more and more that I've done it now, it's become easier.
Yeah,
So I
definitely.
think the more often, the better.
I think that's such a good point, especially in this industry since the pandemic and everybody's booming, or many people are
Hmm.
booming. Um, Businesses are just changing really fast right now.
Yes.
And like, to say I was only going to look at those margins or those overhead expenses once a year, like at least at IDECO, things change way faster than that. So to definitely be looking at that normally, we'll circle back around later to how often we should be increasing our pricing. But I want to touch back because I know everybody listening is going to ask, would you be willing to share what that buffer for losses you set aside a month is, whether it's a percentage or like a general estimate of how much that like we're going to end up hitting this?
So we kind of do it by project. It's kind of hard because our projects can take like 2 years, So we kind of look at it as like, okay, here's how many projects, and this is the stuff that I do in the beginning of the year. So every year at the beginning of the year, I'm I'm looking at what my expenses are going to be, what I think my expenses are going to be for that year. And then that way then every month when I'm going back to it, I'm adjusting it where it needs to be adjusted, right? So when I kind of account for, depending on the project size, anywhere from 2 to 5,000. Um, that's just based on like our past losses. So I don't really know how to like help someone who maybe doesn't have that yet. Maybe like just do a flat percentage or maybe just a flat number. But we kind of know also like what categories we might have losses in more. Like lighting's a big one. So if lighting, because what can happen is our receiver can open up the lighting and everything looks great, right? So, and then that lighting is sitting at the receiver for 6 months. Then when they go to install it, it's not working. There's something like wrong with the electrical. More than not, sometimes that vendor will replace it, but it's been now so long that it doesn't, so we have to like take some of those losses. Same thing with rugs. With our other receiving warehouse, they wouldn't roll out the rugs. They would just like go, okay, we have it now. Our new receiving warehouse does, but we would roll out the rug at install and there would be a tear or a rip or like some discoloration and we wouldn't be able to use that. So we look at those losses as in a project. So I guess you have to look at it and go, okay, how much, maybe let's just use furniture since it's easier. It's just a furnishing job. It's a whole house though. I would say like at least a couple thousand, And if you don't have those losses, then great, but plan for them.
Great. Thank you for sharing that, Lindsey. I know you held off on getting a studio office space outside of your house for years. We had this convo a lot while you were just starting out and you were keeping that overhead really low. Then you got one. You got your keys, and the next week COVID hit, and your team worked from home for almost a year before really being able to even utilize the space. How did the studio affect your pricing even during that time you weren't using it? So, like, as you made that jump, how much did that get incorporated into your rates?
Well, I had saved for that studio space for at least a year. I knew at some point that I was not going to be able to grow any much more in my own house. And for me, I like to take risks, but I also like to be careful and plan for those risks. So I had money saved up. So when we bought the studio, I know I had a year's worth of rent. So when COVID hit, I wasn't as stressed because I knew I had that money. And we already accounted, we had already, the timing was just right. We got the keys in December. I usually raise my rates at the beginning of the year. So I knew we had already raised our rates based off of how much that studio was going to cost us. So all of our new projects going into that year was already covering the studio. Now, what we didn't, what we wanted the studio for partially was to do these sip and shops. And that we could not do for a year. I ended up still going into the studio and working from the studio by myself. So it's still paid for like what we needed it to accomplish. It got us those bigger clients and we had a space to meet with them in a very safe environment. So it kind of did what it was supposed to do in that way. But we were really wanting to have these monthly or quarterly sip and shops to really pay for the studio. We didn't really make money on the studio the first year, but we didn't lose it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. At IDCO, we've had the privilege to access a lot of proprietary information from interior designers' processes. And while we never share any specific info from that, we definitely have compiled data as a whole on how the industry charges. It primarily breaks into two categories. There's flat fee or there's an hourly rate. Can you explain some of the pros and cons to offering, let's start with flat fee services first?
Okay, so I feel like I've priced, every which way. Flat fee, what's funny is that when you really think of every way to price, it comes down to hourly. If you are really pricing your flat fee correctly, like to where you wouldn't be losing money, you are basing it off of how many hours and your hourly rate, right? So the pro to flat fee is that it's all out on the table for everyone, right? The client can plan, how much you're going to make on the project. A lot of pros that designers think is a pro is that they don't have to track their hours, which they should always track their hours, even if they are doing flat fee. But I guess for designers, a pro could be that. And, you're going to know if you're doing it correct, you're going to know, okay, this is when, I'm going to make and bring in that dollar amount, right? I think it's really nice. I think it's just better for a client. I think, honestly, if I'm being really candid, I think that the only pros for flat fee are for the client and not for the designer. The cons, the cons are, this is just my opinion, so I'm not dogging on anyone who does flat fee, but the cons are like, you will lose money, you will lose money, you will lose money, in my opinion, from my experience. You have to set major, major boundaries on what is included in that flat fee, and you have to stick to it. You have to really, really have a good idea of how long it takes you to do something. And most of the time, designers don't. And not because maybe they're not tracking their hours, but also because you have no idea how it is to work with that client. That client can say they make fast decisions, that they want, X, Y, and Z. And you go, okay, like based on the 5 minutes that I had in their consultation or whatever, I'm going to make this proposal. But like, most of the time when people tell me they make quick decisions, they don't make quick decisions.
Right.
So I think there's more cons, but that's just my opinion.
Definitely. I think that even when you set flat fee, you need to be tracking your hours because you are still likely paying someone else on your team an hourly rate. So to come up with a flat fee and say that we're going to estimate it's this much, and if you do flat fee, always build in a 20% cushion on top of that because that will get used. But you have to remember unless you are a one person show, you are still paying someone else out at an hourly rate, even if they are a salaried employee. Like, they're still being used for
Yes.
that time. So you need to be considering that. So I did want to touch on something. Lindsey and I talk about this a lot at camp, and I just stress it so much. As we start getting into hourly, specifically, Lindsey will break down how she bills in different processes. She bills in 3 different phases, but the first phase being an hourly rate. The problem I see with hourly is that designers do not increase their rates frequently enough to compensate for the knowledge that they have obtained. When you take a step back and look at it, I charge hourly, but I'm now really good at my job. So this job is going to take me less hours, and therefore I'm going to be paid less money because I am better at my job. And that is the fundamental problem that I have with hourly, because I don't think people find the courage or the confidence to increase their rates at a frequent enough pace to match the knowledge and the skills that you're obtaining, even on just one past job. So, Lindsey, I know you've been burned by flat fee in the past, and because you never know how a client's going to work, but you have a really interesting way of breaking down your process and your billing for what feels fair to a client and what makes sure that you are never losing money on a project that you can prevent. Can you talk us through your 3 billing phases and how they break down?
Yes. And to your point, Anastasia, I agree with that. If you're hourly, um, you're only going to make money regardless, though, on hourly or flat fee if you raise your rate. So even with flat fee, if you are, still not raising your rate, you're still basing that flat fee on your hours and your hourly rate. Like, unless you're just making up numbers, which is bad. Like, you shouldn't really be doing that. You're still basing it on an hourly rate. So even if you decide to do flat fee, like, I would say, and I agree with you, like, the major part about pricing is feeling confident enough to raise it, to charge what you're worth. And what I know, we'll get into that later. But for us, when when I started with flat fee because I just thought, like, oh, this is easier. I don't really know what I'm doing. And I kind of just like came up with numbers. And of course I lost money on that. Right. So then, I think just based on like what we were doing and the feedback that I was getting from clients early on, it made sense for me to split up every phase and to price it in a way that felt good for the client and myself. So when I was coming up with this kind of system, it was more so on what would be the best client experience for my client, not so much of like what's going to be easier for me and my business, because I knew that my business at this point, it was still only me and Katie. So Katie was like doing procurement and I was doing design. So even though I had an employee, like, I was still doing all the design work, so I knew things were going to change because I knew early on that I was going to have employees and other designers. So I break down our phases from design, procurement, and install. And so everything with design is an hourly rate. That is everything from, you know, sourcing product, doing drawings, doing elevations, um, searching for samples and going out in the field, site visits, team meetings, client meetings, anything that is like part of the design is an hourly rate. Um, do you want to break down like each phase really, or do you want me to go
Well,
through?
we'll start with that. Let's start with
Okay.
phase 1 design. So, okay, so that's everything during the phase. This is everything that a client thinks that interior designer does, is really this phase, because they forget about all of phase 2 and phase 3, or they don't know about it. So, in phase 1, how do you provide yourself enough cushion to cover the hours spent during this phase when you're preparing that initial proposal? I know that people get really nervous about the proposals, and unless you've carefully logged your hours of past projects, you aren't necessarily coming up with a number based on data. You're making up a number. So talk to us about how you come up with this number.
So we've come up with this number, from, just like you said, from past experience, from how long it typically takes us to do revisions. And I will be honest, and when I first started, like, I didn't even account for revisions. So when I was doing proposals, I wasn't thinking about revisions. And then as I started adding it, yeah, I did make up the number because I didn't have that data, you know? So I do think that once you have enough projects under your belt and you can look back on those and you are tracking your hours and you can go, okay, I spend around this amount, you know, of hours on revisions, then you can add that into your proposal. For us, we do about 1 to 2 rounds of revisions per project per phase. So let's say, for example, space planning, then we go into construction design. Let's say it's like a full project. Space planning usually gets 1 or 2 revisions, then construction design gets 1 or 2 revisions, then furniture gets 1 or 2 revisions. And I break down my proposal by those phases and then by rooms too. So it's a very detailed proposal. But we usually do about 1 to 2 days worth of work. Like 1 to 2 revisions can take 1 to 2 days worth of work.
And to
Now,
clarify, when you say 1 to 2 revisions, you mean round of revisions. Like there might technically be 3 things that are changing in that revision, correct? You mean rounds?
yes. So when we do revisions and we're getting feedback, it can be like for space planning, for example, it can be, you know, we'll give them options and they might say, we want kitchen in option 1 and bathroom in option 2, and we want to change a little bit of, you know, the laundry room and whatever. So it could, you know, typically it's about 5 items in the first round of a revision. And then if we do a second round, you know, it gets lower and lower. So I kind of look at that and go, okay, how long is that going to take us? It usually takes us about a day or 2 worth of work, like hours in a day. So I always cushion for 2 days of revision for each of those phases. And then the most important thing is to include that in your proposal. So we need to write that you're not just like, oh, this proposal includes revisions. We need to write, this proposal includes 1 to 2 rounds of, or 2 rounds of revisions equals 2 days of work, this many hours. So that if they are on, you know, revision 3 and 4, which typically doesn't happen, but sometimes it does, we can say, you know, your estimate didn't include this many revisions. So sometimes that helps them like make those decisions quicker because they're like, okay, time is money, you know, and now I'm racking up the money. But yeah, that's typically kind of how we do it. I think it's really important to, again, understand on average how many revisions you're doing and how many items are in those revisions to include that in the proposal. And if you don't, like, just come up with that kind of average number and then again give yourself a cushion for it.
Here at IDECO, we have 7 years experience working directly alongside award-winning interior designers from around the world. Our mission to provide creative business solutions for interior designers in beautiful ways is what we absolutely obsess over. From pre-written client email templates with dozens of 5-star reviews to fully copywritten client process documents used by hundreds of designers worldwide, we have a track record for making things easy. As a listener of the Interior Collective, we are proud to give you an exclusive discount code to our 2 best-selling products, client email templates and client process bundles. Use code podcast20 to save 20% off either at ideco.studio. I've linked it in today's show notes for easy reference. Again, that's podcast20 at ideco.studio. In this phase, you're billing hourly, you've estimated hourly, you have your total number of hours you're thinking. You've said that this typically includes 2 rounds of revisions. If it gets beyond that, then you'll say, hey, you've exceeded what was in the estimate. Totally happy to make these revisions, but those will be added on, which will exceed your total. Does everyone on your team bill at the same hourly at this rate? Is it always just like Lindsey Brooke Design bills at X dollars per hour, or do you have like a tiered system amongst your designers?
We do not have a tiered system. That is another kind of decision that I made internally that is typically not done in the industry. And I did that for a couple of reasons. One, it is very confusing for clients. And when they see a bill, and you know, our design teams have at least 2 people. So it's a senior and a junior. Sometimes they share a design assistant. So certain projects might have that design assistant. And then there's myself. So it could be a lot of, you know, just one day of work can be then like, you know, 4 different line items at 4 different prices. And I wanted to keep it really simple for the client. Money for the client is a very like with a project, what I feel is a very black and white thing. It's like, this is how much they have and this is what they can spend. And they take that proposal, even though it's a proposal, and we say, this is an estimate, it can change. They're looking at it like it's not changing. We all know this, So that's why I have to spend so much time on proposals and really get it right, because I know at the end of the day, like most of the clients are going to hold you to that proposal, even though technically they can't. But like they're planning for that number, right? Because they're looking at you, the professional, to give you that accurate number. So when we decided to keep it a flat rate, I also decided to only charge one time, no matter how many people were working on that project. So if the senior and the junior designer, and myself have an internal design meeting, there's 3 of us working on that project for an hour, we're only charging our client 1 hourly rate, not that hourly rate 3 times. So it balances itself out, because one, when our designers are working on the projects, they're typically not working on the projects at the same time, unless we're all together doing like an internal meeting, or they're going to source something, or they're looking through materials. And so we're actually making more money on that. But then when we are all together during those site visits, or during internal meetings, the client is saving money. It works out itself, but we end up making more money that way. I also don't feel comfortable putting a value on my employees. That's just an internal thing. I don't want to say, my senior designer means more and they are going to bring more money into the project, when the junior designer is doing just as much detailed work and good work, and it just doesn't feel right for me.
Can you share how and when you collect the payments for this design phase?
So we collect it once a month, and it's on the 15th of every month. So
Okay.
that gives us time to, make those invoices and look over things and make sure we're on track, and then, provide it to our clients. So they get paid. We bill them once a month on the 15th, and we collect that not from the retainer. So a lot of times people are having questions, and designers always ask me like, oh, then you use a retainer for your design fees. No, we collect this on top of that retainer.
Got it. Because in your process, that design retainer is held throughout the entire project, and
Mm-hmm.
then that gets applied to accessories at install. And then if there's anything left over, that would technically be refunded back to the client, but there typically isn't.
Yeah, it goes towards like the outstanding balances of shipping, maybe installs, accessories, things like that. Yeah.
Got it. What happens, or how do you handle, if you're approaching the estimated amount of design hours you had proposed to a client and you're going to exceed that estimate? Can you walk us through how you make it feel approachable and helpful and like you're on your client's team while still standing firm and saying, I need to be paid for these hours?
Yes. So the first thing always is during the consultation. I mean, I'm constantly having conversations around money with our clients. And I think that it's really important to set that tone in the very beginning. So, like during the consultation, even the phone consultation, we're asking them about their budget. And then in the in person, we're asking them about their budgets again. And we kind of get it out of the way and just say, like, hey, like we have a lot of conversations about money and we don't want to make it awkward. But, we want to make sure that we stay on track and that that I value your budget. I want to spend your money like it's my own money, and we want to get to know where they like to spend their money and where they don't like to spend their money. And that is all conversations about money. So our operation manager does all of our client billing and invoicing. And so once she has that invoice, she compares our past invoices. So let's say maybe they've had 2 additional months of design fees. She's going to look at those past invoices and see where we are at total for them. And then she's going to compare them to the proposal. And then she'll kind of let me know like, hey, project X, Y, and Z is getting close to their lower amount on the proposal. Because in the proposal, we give a range, a high to a low range of hours. And so we start having conversations with our client once we're halfway to the lower end of the proposal. Once we hit that lower end, then once we get halfway through that, and then once we get to the higher end. And then when we reach the higher end, we let our clients know, hey, this is where we're at. This is how much, more time that we need. This is how much more we have to do. So we really outline it. And at this point, they've had now, whatever 3 or 4 warnings that they've gotten to this space. So it's not like all of a sudden we're like, hey, you're at the high end now. So having um, those constant conversations are just going to help your overall client experience. There's not, I mean, I go back to like, what would I want? Like, I would never want to get slammed with a bill and think that I'm somewhere else, even though I know that I could be spending $30,000 on design. I don't want to be like 3/4 of the way in and then be at that 30,000 and go like, whoa, like what happened? We still have all this to do. So it's something we're constantly still working on, and it's something that we constantly have to remind ourselves to do. But now that I've handed it off to the operations, to Katie, who does our operations, it's much more manageable because she can kind of track that and then let me know. And because before, my hands were in so many things that, yeah, I would forget sometimes. And I think that it's very easy to go to the day-to-day thing, and we're doing so many things, and we have families, and we have this, and we have friends, and we have employees that we have to take care of. That it is easy for us to forget that, our clients might know what we're doing, but they don't know where we stand with bills. And one month could be really low, and then the next month could be most of their design hours, and they're thinking that their next bill is going to be somewhere along that first bill. And so I think just having those conversations, educating, I always talk, and we both talk so much about educating your client from the beginning at Design Camp. And it is very important about all aspects and having those conversations. And I know it's hard. Money is a very hard thing to talk about. And I was not good at it in the beginning, but just like anything, the more and more you do it, the easier that it's going to be. And then the clients are really going to respect that you're valuing their budget just as much as they're valuing their own budget.
I think you touched on something that can really help, especially a newer designer or a designer who's just getting going with like growing their team. You have Katie do it. You have your operations manager handle the invoicing. When IDCO moved over to having our studio director handle invoicing, there's a personal attachment level that's removed because those people were not the creatives on the project who can literally just look at, okay, these hours were logged. It's very black and white to them. And so we're going to send this off. And for me, I removed the ability to sit there and question like, oh, should I actually charge them for like that thing that took me a little longer than like I really thought it should have. And so having an external party besides you or your actual designer being the person to do the invoices, I feel makes that step of money management a lot easier. It's a lot easier for them to collect those
Yes.
funds.
Yes, I agree with that. I think that early on, it's very emotional when you have your own business, right? Everything is super emotional, and you can't help it. And as women, we can't help it. I hate to stereotype that, but it's just in our blood to care and to want to make everyone happy sometimes, and to want to feel like you're giving them the best. But I had a very one of my mentors is a male, and I had a very early conversation with him early on in my business about how it is, charging clients and this and that. And he was just like, I never think of it like that. And so for me, it was a way to look at go, like, I have to take emotion. He's like, you have to take emotion out of it. Like, if you want to make money, you have to think as a business entity and not as a personal person. And I know that this industry and what we're doing is very personal. We're in their home, we're creating things for their, a home for their family to live in and to thrive in and to make memories in. And that's a very personal journey. But the money aspect of it has to not be personal. It has to not be emotional. And I think you're correct when you hand that off to someone who doesn't have that emotional tie as much as you do to a client who's not in that client's home every day and knows their kids and knows, like things about their home. It's much easier for them to see it as black and white.
Okay, Lindsey, that covers the initial billing phase.
Mm-hmm.
Talk to us about what phase 2 at Lindsey Brook Design looks like, ordering and procurement.
Okay, so ordering and procurement, our procurement phase is really ordering all the product, following up on all that product, being in communication with our receiving warehouse to make sure that those products come in correctly and dealing with any damages, claims, getting repairs, things like that. And then also prepping for install. So making sure our FF and E schedules are up to date and to give those lists to the receiving warehouse for install and prepping the team for install. So it's pretty much everything from when a client approves a design to right before install, all of that kind of middle ground stuff. And we charge a flat percentage based off of their product invoice. So that's why it's really important for us. We are a full service design firm. It's really important for us to purchase and manage and control that aspect of the project. And it's also how we are making money off of the project. So we get out of hourly. Our procurement manager does not charge, we do not charge an hourly rate for her to do her job for the client. It is 10% based off the product invoice. So if they have $100,000 worth of furniture, we are adding, $10,000 to that procurement or to that proposal for procurement. One thing that you have to remember is that you have to charge tax when you are ordering product for people. So if you charge an hourly rate and you're ordering, you have to charge tax on that hourly portion. When you are doing flat rate, you have to break it down and charge hourly. I'm sorry, you have to charge the tax on that hourly portion. It's the law. So you have to charge tax. So for us, it was a much easier way. I mean, really, we started doing it because our invoices for procurement were like pages long. And our client was like, oh my God, it was so overwhelming, like so overwhelming. And it's much easier now when we say, okay, they go, okay, I approve this $100,000 proposal. They already know in their head, okay, at the end of this, I have to put on $10,000 for that procurement fee, rather than not knowing how many hours it's going to take. And we all know right now it's taking forever to get things. The follow up that we have to do now is much more than the follow up we had to do 2 years ago.
Did you adjust that percentage at all during, well, since COVID has started, since the work has in many times quadrupled, following up with things being delivered and whatnot?
Yeah, but ironically, we were at 8%, and when we did right before we got the studio, like I had to evaluate all of my costs, right, for the studio. And right before COVID, luckily, we said, okay, we're actually losing money on 8%. We're cutting it really close. So we decided to do 10%, and we've been at 10%. We are figuring out, we do have to raise it again. So we're figuring out the best way, because the follow-up and the damages have become a major part of the procurement manager's jobs over the last 2 years. There has been so many more damages, so much more follow-up, right? So many more back orders where we were spending, or a procurement manager was spending maybe 20% of her time doing that before. It's now like 70 to 80%. So to the point to where we were thinking of bringing on an extra person, and Katie, who was our operation manager, was helping our procurement manager follow up. That's how much manpower we needed. So now we are looking at, okay, this isn't going away, right? COVID might be kind of slipping in and out of whatever, but like this is not going away. Like it's still a problem. So yes, we either have to raise that percentage, or we're thinking of maybe not raising the percentage, but we do give a discount off of our furniture, and we're thinking of lowering that discount. So we're comparing what that would be and what that would be for the client and what that would be for us. So right now, it is going to get raised, but maybe not necessarily in that percentage, if that makes sense. Like we're trying to figure
Right,
out where
not
to
so
where to bring in
directly.
where to bring in that extra revenue to cover the cost, but it might not be from raising that percentage. It might come from other places.
Got it. So, okay, with $100,000 furnishing budget, all that's been ordered, you're then charging 10,000 on top of that for this phase, if we're just sticking with strict numbers. I
Yeah.
don't know what your sales tax is, but let's say it's 875. So then they're getting a bill for
Mm-hmm.
$10,875 because you're paying the tax on that. And that is because they're considering it a product, even though that's a service. That part's confusing to me.
Yeah, it's not a service. It's an act of selling something. So
Got it.
just like if they were coming into a store, you have to charge tax on the product, which we do. If I'm being honest, I don't really know the ins and outs of this. I just know that my CPA said you have to tax it. It's not just a straightforward service. It's a product attached to a
Got it.
service.
Okay. Well, thank you. Hot tip. Do you know, Lindsay, is that nationwide or California specific? Did your CPA
I
mention?
think it's nationwide.
Okay,
I
so
think it's
definitely
like,
check with your
yeah,
CPA. But I think it sounds like it's a nationwide thing.
yeah.
Okay, so lastly, does that flat rate percentage include or exclude shipping and receiving?
No. So this is something that we always really have to break down to our clients because it is confusing. We're actually putting together a whole like what to expect on this phase. Like we have one, but we're detailing it even more because that procurement fee is just for, you have to think of it as our time. It's just to cover our time. So it's a flat percentage of what it's going to take to do that ordering, to do the follow up, to claim what the damage is, to prep for install. It is not going to include any shipping costs. It doesn't include any receiving warehouse fees. That is all separate. It's a separate company. It's nothing to do with us. It's really just for our time for that phase.
Okay, great. So that wraps up phase 2. And now we're into the third phase. Everything's been received. You're ready for install. And phase 3 is installation. Talk us through how you bill for that.
So we do flat day rates for installation. And that can be, it's usually for the whole team. So it's not like per person, it's for however many people that we bring for installation, and it's for 8 hours. So typically we're not doing installs for more than 8 hours. If we are, they're paying additional hourly rate past that 8 hours, but that flat fee covers 8 hours. We have incorporated half day installs because we are doing multiple installs now, right? Because certain things, we're not going to hold up a project for a couple of pieces that now are back ordered, a million years. So we'll do a main install and then we'll do a half day install when those other pieces come in. So half day install is up to 4 hours. Anything over 4 hours, I don't care if it's 4.5 hours, it gets charged a full day rate. And then we also charge like our prepping for install, like accessory, like packing and all that kind of stuff. So it was just much easier for us to manage and go, okay, based off of, because when I was doing hourly rate before, I was doing hourly rate for install. Some projects would have like 8 people involved. Some projects will only have 4 people involved. And so on those bigger jobs where I was bringing in more people to help, I was losing money on installs after I factored in my costs.
Because you were never charging hourly rate by person. You were
Right,
always charging one hourly
right,
rate. Got it.
right. So because of the way I charge, I had to start thinking of the way it's going to relate to every phase and to make sure that I'm making money in every phase. So that's why we decided to do the flat rate, because it cushions that so that I can bring on more people for certain jobs, and that we need the extra help. So when we kind of restructured it into a flat rate, I kind of looked at it and went, okay, what's the minimum amount of people that we have on an install? It's usually myself, the senior designer, a junior designer, a procurement manager, and possibly an assistant. So those are
And
our
a
like, and
handyman,
myself.
right? And
But this does
you're
not include a handyman.
okay.
This is only for our time. Again, when we are doing our proposals and the way that we charge, it's only for our time. So anything additionally, that handyman will be a separate charge because it's a separate company, totally separate thing. So when I was looking at this flat fee, I was looking at, okay, how many people and what is my cost for this? And then I was marking that up to have cushion so that if I needed to bring in someone else or 2 other people or whatever, I have that cushion. So it was a way for me. I didn't base it off of our hourly, if that makes sense. So I didn't go, okay, it takes 8 hours and we make X amount of hourly and that's how much our, installs are going to be. It's based off of our costs and then our markup of those costs.
Got it. What do you feel are things that you have added to your process as a designer that can help a client feel like they are getting more than what they paid for?
Um, I think it's a level of service, right? So for us, and I stress this so much at design camp, like the client experience, like I always tell our clients, um, I want you to have a beautiful home, right? At the end result and the main goal is for you to have a beautiful home. We all know this. But for me, as the owner of Lindsey Brook Design, my main focus is for your client experience to be out of this world. That might mean that it's less stressful during construction. It might mean that we are going to be more organized. It might mean that we are going to hold your hand through this. But whatever our client needs, we provide. I will say that having professional, beautifully branded documents, having those next level, thanks to IDECO, those documents, that investment guide, the welcome guide, everything looking the same and polished, that helps a lot. That makes people feel like, wow, look at what I'm getting, and we show in our proposal examples of what a mood board would look like, what our elevations look like, what part of that design presentation, because we want, we got all of that through IDECO made, and it's really beautiful and it's really next level. And we want to show them, like, we're giving them really big proposals. Like we specialize in full scale, full service jobs, right? So that's kind of our niche. And so the proposals are rather large, and I want to show them from the beginning, but look at all of this beautiful documentation you get. So that's one. Having your process, like our processes are ironclad. We are constantly changing them. We're constantly maneuvering them to make it better for the client and better for us, but ultimately better for the client. So that's another thing. And our organization is next level. I mean, I can't tell you how many times that, a contractor will tell us, like, I've never worked with a designer that is as organized as our designers are. And having that those documents help us be organized. And I think also just trying to stay ahead of everyone on the project. We want to try to stay ahead of the contractors. We want to try to stay ahead of things coming in damage, like being able to problem solve for our clients and not just have, like, here's the problem, but being like 2 steps ahead with that. Giving those weekly emails that tell them what we're doing every week and pinpointing any problems that we have, like, right away, help with that client experience. So it helps going, like, okay, I'm paying a high level of service, but I'm getting a high level of service. And every time we want to raise our rates or charge differently, we also have to ask ourselves, what are we adding to their client experience, to justify those rates.
Right. Okay, I know everyone listening is thinking, are there ever circumstances where you discount your rates?
No. In the beginning, I would say yes, when I had emotions tied to everything. And I don't want to sound like I'm like such a cold person. I'm a very emotional person and I love my clients. And I will, I don't want to say discount. Sometimes we will not charge for certain things that's very minimal when it is not the client's fault and when it is our fault. So I do take accountability for things that we do wrong. And that is the only time that I will say that, for instance, like for an example, let's say our junior designer put a plan, put a piece of furniture in the plan for something and we caught it early on and it wasn't going to work out. Like maybe when, maybe the client taped it out and was like, we need something bigger and whatever it is. And I'll go back to the junior, and if, let's say she had the wrong measurements, she wrote down the wrong measurements. She was like, oh, I based it off of these measurements that were wrong, and that's my fault. Like, I'm not going to charge the client to resource a rug that was based off of our mistake. So that's the only time I'm ever going to like give them a freebie. I'm never, if I give someone a proposal and they come back and say, well, this is too much, I'm never going to say, okay, well, I'll give you 10% off. Or, okay, well, I'll make my hourly, $25 less, whatever. Like, I'm not going to do that. We will remove services. So it's a very fine dance, I will say, because you don't want to discount, you don't want to give too much away, because that allows someone to start taking advantage of you. It's always happened that way. But I also want to take accountability for things that, we make mistakes on, which happens. We're all human.
Right. Okay. How often do you increase your rates, Lindsey?
Um, we typically do it 1 to 2 times a year. And, you know, for us right now, in the beginning, it was definitely 2 times a year. It was more like once in the beginning of the year and then once towards like the end of summer-ish. Now it's becoming a little bit more less, just because we are kind of getting to that cap of how much we can charge in our area. I mean, we can't just continue to be like, okay, now we're $900 an hour, like I wish, but there is going to be, we're getting to that cap. So we'll probably raise our rates one time this year. But the way that we, structure our business and the way that we make more revenue is in other ways. So it's not necessarily just for us raising our rate. And again, like I said, there's only going to be so many more times that I can raise my rate until I price myself out of our area. So I think it's really important to be competitive and to know what other people are charging in your area. But I also think that like you shouldn't be charging a lower rate just because you're in your first year of business. Like you might have way more experience or a better eye or better processes, better organization, a better understanding of, the service that you're providing to your clients versus someone who's in business 10 years and doesn't have any of that, but is charging, $200 more or whatever, just because they can say they've been in business for 10 years. I don't agree with that. So I think, again, too, like you have to look at like your overall costs. Like that really plays a part into what you want to start charging. And I think it's, valuing yourself and putting worth on it. And I didn't have that in the beginning. I know a lot of people don't, and it's really hard. It's a lot of internal work you have to do on yourself to say, I am worth this much, even though I've only been in business a year. And if you don't like it, then you can find another designer. Yeah.
What are your practices when you have a returning client? And since you worked on their project, your rates have increased. How do you navigate that?
So we always, when we finish a project, we always tell our client they have 6 months to be grandfathered in to their old pricing.
Oh, okay.
Because we are not raising our rates every 6 months, like they usually will fall into that time period of their old rate. So we say you get 6 months from the time your project finishes to add anything else if you want to, add in the backyard that we didn't do before or whatever. After that 6 months, they go to the new rate if there is a new rate. That way they feel like, again, we're valuing them as past clients and, we're allowing them to capture new services if they want to do new services and not feel like they're just like money to us.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, Lindsey, I want to be respectful of your time. I know you have so much going on right now. What is what would you like to say to newer designers or designers who are ready to scale and bring more people onto their team as they're thinking about pricing?
So when you are thinking about bringing on new people, you can't bring on new people and not change the way that you are charging your clients. You're just not going to make money. You have to think of as expanding your team as making money for you. All of my designers make money for the company, but at the same time, they're not going to make money for the company if they're staying at your hourly rate that you've been at when you were a solo designer. So you have to really look at that and go, okay, for this year, again, it's going back to the beginning of the year, look at that year and go, like, we looked at this year and went, okay, we're going to probably be hiring 2 to 3 people. So what does that mean to what we're bringing in? Now, sometimes it's not going to be like, okay, well, we're hiring 3 people. Now we have to raise our rate $300. But we're going to raise our rate a little bit. We're going to decrease the discount a little bit. We're going to try first, some higher level stocking dealer, maybe rather than wholesale dealer with our products. Maybe it's creating a new line that you can make more money on, whatever it is. But if you're expanding with your team and with your overall costs, you have to know how you're going to expand in your revenue as well.
I think that's such a good point to finish off on. I've always said this, that hiring is a revenue stream, not a business expense. And you have to treat it as such from the very beginning, or it will always be a pay cut to your pocket. So if you think about it like that, you know that hiring can be such a blessing for a team. And I really encourage you to explore your options of bringing on even one new role to help you sleep a little easier at night. Lindsey, there are a million things that we can talk about. We go over so much at Design Camp. I promise Lindsey is going to be a regular guest on the Interior Collective. If you're interested in learning more from her, Design Camp is an incredible opportunity to see the exact inner workings of her wildly successful interior design biz. No one has more clear, detailed, or well-maintained business processes than Lindsey, and it's an investment that will pay itself forward tenfold. You can find the details about our next event at design-camp.co, linked in the show notes below. You can follow along with Lindsey at Lindsey Brooke Design on Instagram and get more in-depth process tutorials on her blog at lindseybrookedesign.com. Lindsey, thank you so much. I cannot wait to hug you next week, and I will see you in Santa Monica.
Yes, thank you for having me. Again, it's such a pleasure to always talk business with you. I love it, love it, love it. And I will be on this podcast as much as you will allow me.
Perfect. We're just going to bring you on as co-host next. Thank you, Lindsey. I love you, and I will talk to you soon.
Okay, bye.
If you weren't able to write down everything you heard today, you can find all the links, projects, and images we referenced and other details from this episode of the Interior Collective on our website at idco.studio/podcast. Be sure to follow along on Instagram and subscribe to our newsletter to stay up to date on what we're talking about next week. If you love our podcast, please leave us a review. If you have questions or topics you'd like to hear next, go ahead and email me at hi@theinterior.co. Again, that is hi@theinterior.co.